Good morning, afternoon, and evening, wherever you are, and welcome to another NerdTube Final Fantasy discussion. I am here joined by my Final Fantasy compatriot in arms, Majo Rage. How you doing?
Doing great. Proud to be here as always. How are you tonight, Cheeto?
Looking forward to talking some Final Fantasy. We're the lone amigos here, but I mean we're gonna do it. And today, the first thing we're gonna be talking about is a article that we came across. It is about. I'm gonna bring it up here. It is about 10 inconsistencies in the series in the Final Fantasy series lore. So, as we all know, there are plot holes in Final Fantasies. There are things in Final Fantasy sometimes that just don't make sense. And this article, whether for better or for worse, is going to tell us what these inconsistencies are. Um, Mage, any just before we get started, any that jump to mind that you can think of that might be on this list?
I can't think of any that scream at me off the top of my head. I'm curious as to what they're going to point out and what they deem an inconsistency. A lot of times, articles like this can be loose and fast with whatever they term to be whatever they're trying to make a list of just to get a list real quick and get some clicks.
Yeah.
So let's see if we can debunk some of this, maybe.
Also, just to point out, if you look right over here, I did grab a more recent article this time. This one was published in September of 2021. I know our last article that we did was like posted in 20 like 15 or something like that, so it's kind of dated. But this one is less than a year old, so we're gonna see what these people. Okay, so number 10 is going to be. Did I go past it? No. Number 10. Shinra became a massive company despite their questionable decisions. So in this article, it says the concept of Shinra itself is downright ridiculous. It's one thing to subtly deplete the natural resources of the planet. It's another thing to do it on such a large scale that the planet is wasting away from everyone's in front of everyone's eyes. And yet,
Mm.
even after committing all these egregious crimes, Shinra doesn't really face any major opposition. The only thorn in their side is Avalanche, and even they end up being public enemy number one for some reason. Um, I honestly feel like this is not an inconsistency. It is
No, not at
um
all.
but I
This
do
is
I do find it funny though that they point out that about them, sucking the life out of the planet. I just find it funny that an electric company gets their own military. Like like that's always been a thing I've been questioning. Like, why does an electric company have a military?
that was a really weird thing. I could see having a large private security force, but they had a military large enough to fight a war against Wutai. So
Yeah.
that maybe they should have honed in on this if they wanted to make a gripe about Shinra. Them being people let companies destroy the planet without really raising too much of a fuss constantly as is. So saying that that's a stretch for Shinra to be like that, I think they don't get
With the word
part of what they were
inconsistency
trying
there.
to say with Seven,
Yeah.
which as Boss Man always brings up, it's got a very environmentalist type message.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I don't I wouldn't consider it an inconsistency. I'd consider that more of a questionable plot hole, maybe, or just a
It's
question.
a just a stretch.
Yeah. I don't know if it'd be a yeah. All right. Do you have anything else to say about that one?
Not about that part of that blurb.
All
No.
right. Number 9 is people weren't aware of guardian forces affecting someone's memory. Final Fantasy VIII. The fact that guardian forces end up lending or leading to amnesia is one of the biggest plot twists in Final Fantasy VIII. However, it's hard to imagine that no one knew about this fact in the universe of this game. Given the sheer number of people using guardian forces, this problem of memory loss is bound to have serious repercussions for many. However, no one bats an eye at a serious fact that and lets students lose their memories to cast these some fancy spells. Again, I don't know if I consider that an inconsistency, but it is a good point. I
It's a good
mean,
point, but it was I always read that the plot of that game as the adults didn't tell them that they surely would have known it, but they were content to use this group of youth as their tools
Yeah.
to accomplish their mission.
And I don't think it was very widely known because I don't think a multitude of people use
N-
Guardian Forces.
no,
I think it was
Sid
just
would have known though.
yeah, oh yeah, definitely Sid would have, but like the CDs like that, that they or this, yeah, the CDs, they would have been the one who was using Guardian Forces and stuff like that. So, um that's yeah, that's kind of a bit another bit of a stretch. I've so far not seen any inconsistencies. It's more just questionable plot things so far that are, yeah, like you said, the questionable plot stretches. Let's put it that way. Um, but I mean, it is a good point. It is kind of unbelievable that people would just let these kids use Guardian Forces and they lose their memory. However, if everybody forgets that they take their memories, how would they remember?
Maybe they just forgot about the memory loss.
Yeah,
The troll in me wants to say that.
yeah. Well, and I mean, Final Fantasy VIII is one big troll in my opinion, but I mean, right, whatever. All right, number 8. The slave crown is barely used. Terra
Oh,
is shown to be controlled by the Empire via a slave crown. This mind control device has the potential to become one of the most popular devices in the game. If it was used correctly, that is. Unfortunately, the slave crown is barely used for the rest of the game, which is quite odd. Such a powerful device should have been commonplace, but ends up being nothing more than a lazy plot device. Um, I go ahead, Mage, with this one. I'm assuming that the slave crown is the thing that they used on Terra to,
at the
basically.
yes, they used it to control her. Uh, it's unclear how long they had had it on her, but the returner character at the beginning of the game in Narsh tells her that he removed that from her head.
Mhm.
And
Well, and I remember that she was kind of subservient to them, but I've only played Final Fantasy VI once, maybe a little bit twice. But yeah, but they're right. It kind of was an afterthought. Like,
it
I mean,
was it they used it to hand wave that Tara's not a bad guy despite the things that she had done. I've seen some fan theories that maybe Kefka had been uh, under the control of 1-2, and that was why he was in line with the Emperor for as long as he was, and that maybe a sudden removal of one led to his kind of sudden betrayal of Gestal. Uh,
I just
I
think he was playing a good Jafar role.
probably, I mean, that that's where I'm at with it too. I wouldn't call this an inconsistency in the plot. I would just call this a dropped plot thread. They
Yeah,
could have done more with it, which is a point that one of the first points I agree with in this article. Uh, that it could have, become much more than it actually was in the plot, but I wouldn't call it inconsistency.
I don't think the article writer knows what the word inconsistency means.
I think the article writer might have one or two good ones at the end, but somebody that's an editor told them they had to make a top 10 list
Yeah,
type
right.
thing.
All right. Number 7. Somehow people are, and this is right up your alley, FF4. Somehow people are okay with being a dark and evil knight. The idea of being a a dark knight should be one of the most unappealing jobs of all time. However, level-headed people like Cecile and Kane find it find this designation to be extremely alluring for some reason. First off, Kane's not a dark knight. Kane's a
No.
lancer or a dragoon.
Hmm.
In fact, they're also willing to carry out some horrible atrocities as a dark knight as well, which makes no sense. Cecile himself has a moral conscience, but chooses to complete heinous tasks that are clearly for the sake of accomplishing an evil objective. All right, so I've only played Final Fantasy IV once, or I no, actually, I don't even think I've done that. I think I've watched a playthrough. I am eventually going to want to play through it like wholeheartedly and officially. I'm just waiting for the right moment, and so I can stream it. But this is your wheel. This is your favorite Final Fantasy, correct, Mage? So
Correct, absolutely.
take it,
And
man. To
uh,
tell them what
they're
you're thinking.
well, they're off the mark for like basically completely. Uh, he the king of Baron was an honorable man until the influence of Golbez, and the intro sequence of 4 makes it a very clear point that Cecil is starting to question his missions and what he's doing. He doesn't just blindly follow orders, and if he's been a Dark Knight as the job class, using the power of the darkness within himself for years under an honorable king, but not engaging in military conquest and questionable practices until this point, there's no inherent connection between active evil and the Dark Knight as expressed originally
And
in the plot of 4.
I don't remember Cecile doing anything really heinous. I mean, I know he was starting to question when he was being told. Like, it's kind of like the Beatrix effect. Like, Beatrix eventually started questioning what Brain was doing, and it's like, or Brienne, I don't know how to pronounce it, but because we've never heard it spoken. Um, but I don't ever remember like there being anything in, at least in game, that Cecile did that was super heinous.
The raid on Mysidia was questionable. The Mysidian mages couldn't stand up to the physical assault and overwhelming force of the full Baron military. It's heavily implied that the Red Wings kind of do bombing runs, but I don't think you ever like their bombing runs on Damisan later in the game and stuff. So, maybe that was kind of where they were going. And, at the beginning of the game, it's kind of off screen. But Cecil has his doubts, but I wouldn't say anything that's shown on screen being done by Cecil is heinous
And the
by
fact
any.
that he said Kane was a Dark Knight. I mean, come on. I like,
It's
as I said, I've only kind of watched a playthrough. Well, I've watched a playthrough, and as I said, I know these characters from other stuff, and it's like I know Kane is a Lancer slash Dragoon.
right.
Like
Yeah. No, they're completely off base there. Kane is jealous of Cecil's power, but not of being a Dark Knight.
mhm,
He's perfectly capable warrior being a dragoon.
yeah. All
And
right. Oh, go ahead.
I mean he decimates the party at one point in the game
Hmm.
by himself. He just wipes your entire party.
Yep.
He is a powerful character.
All right. Number 6. Turning an entire city into a monster arena is a horrible idea. Final Fantasy 9.
All right, now we're in your wheelhouse.
I I actually agree with this. Lindblom is one of the biggest cities in the world in Final Fantasy IX. However, the fact that people are completely okay with evacuating the city and letting it get populated with monsters makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. It is impossible to believe that no other area was deemed suitable for such a barbaric festival. It's easily one of the biggest plot holes in a otherwise great title. Um, I don't know if I'm happy or I'm sad that he's saying that it's a great title, because this person has made questionable decisions as well with this list. Um, but I mean, yeah, the hunt, the festival of the hunt in Final Fantasy IX. I agree. Like, even when I first played it, I'm like, are we really turning the city into a like monster hunting arena? Like, I get it. It is very questionable, but at the same time, it's like it's Final Fantasy, like I don't know. I mean, this is one I might agree with him on based on principle. I don't think it's a plot hole. Like, why is it a plot hole? Like,
It's not a plot hole or inconsistency. It's just a
yeah,
questionable decision by the leadership of the city.
yeah,
Why not just have a self contained monster fighting arena for every year?
yeah.
Maybe throw in some human fights for the rest of the year and have, the Festival of the Hunt during its normal time. But
So
letting them loose in the city is kind of dumb, but
yeah, it is.
not a plot inconsistency.
Yeah, but I do agree. But that is, truth be told, though, that is one of my favorite parts of the game, is running around the city beating up monsters. So
It's a
although
great
it makes,
moment.
yeah, although it makes, or although it's stupid, it is a fun idea. It's fun to play. Let me put it that way.
They chose to go with fun over
Sense.
logic at that
Yeah.
point, yes.
Lindblom, by the way, one of my favorite cities of all time
It's
in
a
Final Fantasy.
gorgeous
I mean, look
city.
at that. Look at that. Whew. All right. Number 5. No one thought of an alternate way to defeat Sin before the main cast, Final Fantasy X. The idea of sacrificing summoners time and time again to make Sin go away is one of the worst parts of living in the world in Final Fantasy X. Thankfully, the main characters understood the frutality futility of their quest and embarked on a new quest to get rid of Sin once and for all. It's hard to believe that no other summoner in their bodyguards thought about the same, resigning themselves to such a grim fate only for short-term respite seems rather stupid, and any level-headed person would have tried to find a different way to get rid of Sin. Okay, so with this one, I'm not disagreeing with him. The fact that over what was it, 1,000 years, that nobody really thought, hey, maybe we can defeat sin a different way. However, I am going to point back to that, like thousands of years of religion and everything like that, and like it was like a religion, for the summoners to go on their pilgrimage and to defeat sin. So, and people for thousands of years, well, for at least a couple thousand years on our planet have until what, about 200, 300 years ago, also like thought that they were doing the work of a higher being and doing such atrocities. Now in this case it's sacrificing a summoner. In our cases it's the crusades, it's the Aztecs sacrificing people at the temples. And I mean there are these types of atrocities that are based on faith and belief in all sorts of avenues. So does it surprise me that they think that this is the only way? No. Does it surprise me that they haven't really questioned it up through this point? Not really. But also I feel like the reason why this came to be here is because Orin was there, and that's a different factor from any other summoner that came before.
Hmm.
Because he had actually faced sin and actually, had a little, I think he had a little bit more of an insight as to what was going on with sin rather than that. And then also Titus was there, which is a completely different, also another variable in there that makes it different, based on his backstory and why he was there. And then, just the party size. Like, I mean, you saw I can't remember what Yuna's dad's name was, but like Yuna's dad's party was Orin, Jecht, and him. Like they couldn't have
Yeah,
beat Sin. Like,
right.
and I imagine the pilgrimage. Like, I don't know, like what, but you had like what, seven, six party members. I think it was seven total, right?
Sounds right.
Like that's
Titus,
seven people
Eunice,
that are
and Bob.
super powerful, and yeah, maybe you can defeat sin, but with seven powerful people. But I really feel like that it's it's everything just kind of falls into place. That's actually not one of the biggest questions in Final Fantasy X, in my opinion. My biggest question is, why does the former summoner turn to a pop star going into the sequel? That's my big question. Anyway, go
Yeah,
ahead, Mage.
uh, I don't think that the author got the point of Final Fantasy X, of the plot of it. The main theme is learning to question tradition, authority, and your own prejudices. And people blindly following the status quo has to be the baseline for you to tell a story that expresses those themes. So, and they also seem a little out of touch with history. It's not a stretch for people to be content with ostensibly sacrificing a person by sending them on this pilgrimage.
For a 10-year era of peace.
People will do way worse than that for peace. Peace
Yeah.
is great. I wish I lived during a time where I remembered long, sustained periods of peace.
Yeah, right. The other thing that I was thinking of is, how do we know people haven't tried to defeat sin, you know, without, like without the summoner? Like
Just,
obviously the Albed, or not the Albed, who did in like in the third, in like the third city or past the third city. Remember the whole battle on the beach thing?
Yeah, they made an attempt. They
Yeah.
tried to fight Sin. They weren't going to sit on their laurels and just wait for the summoner. They took action, and just because we didn't hear any mention of a summoner and their bodyguards actually trying to defeat Sin and not go through the ceremony doesn't mean that it didn't happen before.
Yeah, I mean, they just obviously didn't live to tell the tale like Yuna's party did.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, I feel like I feel like it took us what 5 minutes, like less than 5 minutes to debunk this, like this one. Like I really I agree with you. I really feel like they just kind of missed the point of Final Fantasy X. All right, number 4. There was no reason for the world to turn on Arden. Okay, so have you played 15? I can't remember.
I barely played 15. I enjoyed driving the car and listening to the soundtrack of the old games more than playing the combat, and the
Yeah, me
story wasn't grabbing me.
Yeah, me too. Okay, so we'll just read this and we'll see if we have anything to add. Arden's story is one of the most tragic personal tales in Final Fantasy 15. It also feels extremely contrived in a bid to make the riveting antagonist and nothing else. The sacrifice he undertook to mitigate the efforts of the Star Scourge should have been celebrated by many. Instead, everyone, including the gods themselves, changed their mind about Arden and drive him into a corner, forcing him to turn into a malicious entity who hated the world and everything in it. I mean, okay. So it sounds like, as I said, I've played 15 once. So I mean, it just sounds like it's your typical, hero makes a personal sacrifice to save whatever, and then the world turns against him. It might be an inconsistency, or it's just like a weak plot point. I mean, there was a lot of weak things about 15 in my opinion, but I don't think Arden was really one of them. Do you have
Sounds
anything
like
to?
a decent villain. I mean, that,
Yeah,
you know,
I didn't
that,
mind Arden at all. Like
mhm.
they didn't give him too much to do. He was, but not to give away any spoilers for when you do finally get around to playing it all the way through. But they didn't give him a lot to do, and he didn't feel very. He just felt kind of there. He wasn't menacing. He wasn't. I mean, he just kind of. I don't know.
Sounds like he's more of an antagonist than a villain.
Yeah.
A misunderstood antagonist type, and that can be a compelling story. That makes me slightly more interested in 15. Sounds like a decent villain
He even
or
has his own.
antagonist.
He even has his own DLC. Like,
Okay.
so that kind of explains some of his stuff. So I mean, it's not. I would say it's not that. I don't know. Let's move on. Number 3. The geostigma feels like a contrived excuse for more tragedy. Final Fantasy VII, obviously Advent Children. One would think that one would think that the protection that Holy and the Lifestream provided against Meteor should have been good enough to remove any tragedies from the planet. However, the massive success of Final Fantasy VII led to Square milking this universe even further. This led to the emergence of the mysterious disease called geostigma. Caused by the Lifestream's protective effects, this disease feels completely unnecessary and goes to show just how ridiculous the idea of continuing Final Fantasy VII story really was. Um, do you want to start with this one, or you want me to go?
Um, I agree that 7 got milked. I wouldn't say that the geostigma is an inconsistency.
Yeah,
It's a weak like plot point, but I don't think that saying that because there was a conclusion to the original plot of 7 and an end to the threat of the meteor means that everything would always be honky dory on that world. I think that's naive and kind of that indicates that this author maybe reads at a lower level.
yeah, maybe. Um, I don't know. I mean, because the thing about geostigma, and I want to make sure I'm saying remembering this right. the thing about geostigma is that you were basically adding an external element into the world between holy and the life stream, and who knows what kind of effects that was going to have on the entire planet. I mean, not to do science, but it's like, if you're introducing an outside element into the atmosphere and everything like that, and we all saw at the end of Final Fantasy VII, there, it was the
Yeah.
entire life stream. And so it's almost like alcohol poisoning,
I
like.
mean, it's a plausible concept and explanation for people getting sick and as a result of something that was good, and an unintended consequence leading to a continuation of a story isn't a bad plot setup at all.
Mhm. Yeah. So I mean, I wouldn't
I-
call it an inconsistency. I do agree. I mean, Final Fantasy VII has been milked, but I enjoyed Advent Children. I liked it a lot,
it was a
actually.
fun watch,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah. And it was, I mean, after, how many years was it? Was it almost 10 years? It was
It
just
had
under
been a
10 years.
while, and I was ready. It's not like
And,
they
and it's the first time
made.
we had ever heard those characters talk, I believe, except maybe in Kingdom Hearts.
Yeah, you're right. They spoke some in Kingdom Hearts, but that was the first like full
In
blown
canon.
in canon
Yeah.
dialogue. Yeah.
So I feel like that's a little bit weak, and it's not an inconsistency. I mean, basically, that's his complaint with Advent Children, is what that is. All right, number two. So this is what I think should have been number one, but the concept of time travel is handled very poorly. Final Fantasy VIII. That seems like an opinion, not an inconsistency. Final Fantasy VIII features copious amounts of time travel scattered all across the plot. However, the end result is a mess due to the unclear nature of these time travel machines. Or ma- machines? Yeah,
Mechanics.
or mechanics. Wow, I can't read today. The idea of time compression is still something that most people don't understand to this day. This, coupled with Ultimecia's ham-fisted inclusion in the game, makes it for a rather unsatisfying twist in the story that clearly uh, integrated just to allow the bombastic conclusion. Um, okay, so Final Fantasy VIII, not my favorite Final Fantasy. However, I feel like he's really missing the point. With Final Fantasy VIII, I know where people come from and say that Ultimecia was ham-fisted in. However, I disagree, because although you don't hear the name of Ultimecia until like disc 4 or the end of disc 3, there is always this precedent that there is a sorceress possessing people. So
Mm-hmm.
although you don't know her name, and if I'm remembering incorrectly, please leave it in the comments below. But I there's always, when you have Ida, right, Ida, then
That's how I pronounce it.
okay. With
But
Ida, it's like, she's possessed by someone. You know that she is not, not the sorcerer, like the sorceress. They say that like early on in the game. So just because you don't know Ultimecia's name does not mean that she's been ham-fisted in. Necron was ham-fisted in, like at the end of 9, and I'm saying that about one of my favorite Final Fantasies. Like, that was ham-fisted in. Necron was. Yeah,
Zeramus is ham-fisted in, and
yeah,
that's my favorite. But it was Ultimecia is foreshadowed better than Zeramus uh
Necron.
or Neron. Absolutely.
So, and also the plot of time travel. Yeah, it's a mess. Duh.
It is.
That's the most confusing thing about it. But I wouldn't say it's an inconsistency.
No.
Actually, it's pretty consistent for Final Fantasy VIII that that time travel's a mess.
I
So
I think Final Fantasy just doesn't do time travel well, and they try to do it a lot, and they always do it poorly. But it's okay. We still love it.
yep.
I don't think I think the author is really telling us what his least favorite Final Fantasy is, though. He's got 2 8 digs on one list.
Yep. And here's the most inconsistent one of them all. Number one, and I say inconsistent because it's not consistent with this list at all. The Akuria don't really play a huge role in the story. Final Fantasy 12. In Final Fantasy 12 features the classic summon system, this time in the form of espers. And actually there were no classic summons in Final Fantasy 12. Now there were summons, yes, you are correct, but there were not any actual classic summons. These powerful figures were created by the Okuria, the most powerful beings in the world of Ivalice. So it's rather odd that these figures don't really play a major role in the events of Final Fantasy 12. In fact, the entire story would have been perfectly functional without the inclusion of these figures at all. Um, I do agree that they don't matter to the story whatsoever. And I mean, yeah, you see them throughout the game, but you really don't have much to do with them, and they don't have much to do with the story. But the story is one of the weakest parts of 12, in my opinion. So why does it matter? Like I wouldn't say that's an inconsistency. I would just say that's bad writing.
Yeah, I maybe an attempt at world building that didn't sell well, and you end up having no investment in them, and they don't feel as big or as important as they wanted it to. But that's not an inconsistency, it's just an undersell.
Yeah, I know a very inconsistent way to end this article, I must say.
If their most well argued part was the part about Ultimecia, and they should have put it number one.
Yeah. Okay. Well, with that all being said, I don't know what's going on with this article, but definitely it should not be called inconsistencies. I think that title was clickbait. And they're just basically griping about things, about, like, they're just basically saying the problem. They should have titled it "The Problem with Certain Final Fantasies" or something like that.
Weakest Final Fantasy plot points.
That's perfect. Actually, see, we fixed it. We fixed it. We did it. We fixed it.
We should be editors over at wherever.
Game Rant. I think this is what they're
Game
playing.
Rant?
Yeah.
Game Rant, hire us.
Yeah.
We'll
We'll make
fix your articles.
at least we'll proofread them. Okay. Mage, thank you very much for joining me for this article breakdown. Everyone out there, if you can, leave us a comment. If you know of any articles you want us to take a look at, take a stab at, breakdown, even just comment on, let us know. Give us a like and consider subscribing to NerdTube. We are the greatest YouTube channel you maybe kind of sort of heard of. We'll catch you in the next one, and we'll catch you later.